So carrying on our theme of clinical leaders, I'm very pleased to have another clinical leader here. So Hilary joins us from KPMG. Hilary's got a clinical background as an oncologist and is also now clearly involved in leadership and management. So very looking forward to hearing your thoughts, Hilary.
Thank you very much, Jag. Follow that, as they say. I think it was 2003, and I elected to go to a little side session on leadership by a Dr. Mark Goldman. And he gave if I'm really honest with you, a slightly plodding military talk. It certainly wasn't. I think the hand movements and the lack of slides demonstrate that you've grown and developed in terms of public speaking in the last 8 years. And I've been completely caught out because I've done the nerdy thing of, getting some nice person to help me with my slides to talk about KPMG, and I haven't got any hand actions or jokes, but, I'll do my best. And I've been a management nerd most of my life. My husband still teases me about the fact that for my 30th birthday, he bought me a book by the man who was running Ford at the time. And one of my favourite management textbooks is by Rosabeth Moss Kanter, who I had the good fortune to meet once, and I'll get to that in relation to one of the slides. But one of her best books is When Elephants Learn to Dance. So there we are. So one of the thoughts, and I think I find myself increasingly standing on platforms thinking, was Mark Britnell meant to speak, or is it Hilary Thomas? So the fact that I'm a clinician probably means I'm as appropriate to be here as my colleague, the Global Head of Health for KPMG and the former Director General for Commissioning of the Department of Health. But one of the things that he mentioned and that Teresa mentioned was that by bringing you a KPMG perspective this afternoon, it was slightly out of the box. So it was an opportunity to make you think about leadership beyond just the NHS. And Jag's made a reference to that. And I think some of the most exciting weeks I've had in my career have been opportunities to get outside the box. So I want to say a little bit about personal insights to start with, but the importance of a leadership culture, and that doesn't just apply to the NHS. The challenges for the NHS, and then some kind of thoughts about really things to focus on for yourselves to get really to that point of making it happen. So my personal insights, I'm an oncologist by background. I was a senior lecturer at the Hammersmith with an enormous private practice. That's a terrible Freudian slip. God, I've spent my life trying to avoid private practice. But anyway, with a clinical practice of about 650 patients a year, and my colleagues were seeing about 150. And when the new dean came along and said, if you're not generating £250,000 worth of grants a year within 2 years, you will lose your job. And I thought, right, okay, well, I can see the writing on the wall. And went for the new chair of oncology at the University of Surrey because I could not deliver this incredibly busy clinical practice and be an academic. So I got myself to a position where I was Professor of Oncology in a new department, a new post, and was able to give some thought and get some time away from what was then 9 fixed clinical sessions to actually think about my part in the system, as it were. And in that journey, that was why I was in the audience when Mark was talking in 2003, because I was lead clinician for the Cancer Network at that point. And this was all accident. You guys have got a fantastic opportunity not to allow it to happen by accident. I had been on the King's Fund Senior Registrar course in 1990 and thought, wow, this is incredible. And it wasn't until 2000 that someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, would you like to be the lead clinician for our new cancer network at a time when cancer networks were being organised nationally into 28. And I had a kind of 10-year period when I'd spent 4 doing a PhD and I'd been a consultant for 6 years before I'd really thought about what are the leadership management opportunities here. So having done that, I became lead clinician for the Cancer Network, and then a combination of things, one of which was I was on the General Medical Council at the time, and one of my mentors was a chap called Cyril Chantler, who said to me in 2003, would you like to be a chief executive one day? And I thought, And I looked at the role model in my organisation at the time and thought, no way. And then I started to look at a few other role models and thought, well, actually, being a chief executive, you could actually make quite a big difference, couldn't you? And it was about 2 years after 2003, I sat down opposite Mark to ask, how do you become a chief executive in the NHS? And one of the other pieces of advice I got was from Jane Collins at Great Ormond Street, who is also medically qualified, who said, well, you can't even think about it till you've been a medical director. So the next kind of conquer to catch was becoming a medical director. And I got tapped on the shoulder for that as well and was the only applicant. And I set myself a goal that when I stepped down as medical director, there would be more than one applicant. And I suppose I achieved it, but sadly it was a job share. So there were 2 applicants, but for 1 job. And the people I really wanted to be my successors, I could not persuade. And the best person to have been my successor said, I'm sorry, Hilary, it's a 50th birthday present and I'm only 42. So, you know, sad, actually, really sad for the hospital and the system. So I then developed breast cancer. So I had been an oncologist, I'd been a consultant for 14 years at that point, and I was looking around. I'd gone for 1 or 2 other things that were different, that were away from clinical practice. And I then found myself, having not been shortlisted for Chief Executive of the Royal Surrey, where I was, thinking, okay, what am I going to do? And I actually didn't particularly want to go back to breaking the bad news after my own personal experience, because it was just too close to home. So that was probably the thing that catalysed me into leaving the NHS 4 years ago. And I went for pretty well the first thing that came along, actually. It looked okay. I really liked the people I thought I was going to work with. And I'm still in touch with them, thought they were a great management team, took the job. Week 1, they were taken over. And it was complete naivety on my part, but I became the group medical director of a company called Care UK, having been appointed to be the group medical director of something much smaller called Mercury Health. A very, very bumpy ride for about 3 months, having given up my NHS pension and all my job security, thinking, what have I done? But actually, I probably grew up in that 2.5 years faster than in any other 2.5 years in my career. And after the share price collapse at Care UK, it became quite a difficult experience. I was the most senior woman in the organisation, which was very white male, which the private sector is, actually. I mean, it's really fantastic to sit in a room this diverse, I can tell you. But in any event, it became a difficult place. And I spent a year looking for my next job, because I took a very conscious decision. I was going to do the opposite to what I'd done before. I was going to really make sure I got the right job. But I also applied for a whole bunch of different things, and even that process in itself was really insightful. But I also was phoned up, and it was thanks to Mike Richards, actually, by the Chief Executive of Breakthrough, to say, would you like to become a trustee? So the silver lining of having breast cancer was the opportunity to start working in the voluntary sector as well. And I've been the Vice Chair of Breakthrough now for just over 2 years. And it is incredibly rewarding. And it's incredibly rewarding to sit in a voluntary sector organisation with the most functional board I've ever worked with, alongside the day job. So the fact that probably 6-10 days a year I do something completely different has been a real development opportunity. I'm not going to list all of those things, except that the Harvard course, which is called Strategic Planning for the Non-Profit Sector, was something I went on the advice of my executive coach, actually, who at the time was Julia Neuberger, and when she was Chief Executive of the King's Fund. And the course was a week, pretty intensive. I negotiated it as part of my medical director package, and actually, because there were 130 of us on it, it wasn't hugely expensive. But I was the only doctor on it. There were about 3 Brits, about 80 of the 130 were from the States. But again, out-of-the-box experience, intense, work with incredibly bright people, mostly voluntary, non-profit sector, well, entirely non-profit sector, but really, really interesting, and gave me a whole bunch of learning to bring back into the NHS. So I think thinking about your personal development alongside your journey is really important, and being a bit selfish about it is quite important too. So, leadership culture. Well, when you start to look at organisations that are innovative and forward-thinking, you start to see some characteristics come through, and they're listed there. I'm not, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read them out. But it's about being kind of fleet of foot. It's the elephants learn to dance point, really. And so a lot of it is technology-related, and it's particularly technology-related in healthcare. But it can't be harnessed without leadership and people management. And I think the NHS IT programme is perhaps an illustration of that. All the technology in the world isn't going to work unless somebody's prepared to champion it, make it happen, implement it, and do what's necessary to do that kind of change management that sits around it.